All right, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be flipping from the world of boxing to an exciting weekend we have of college football. Man, what a season. This has been such a fun season. As an Alabama fan, it hasn't been too great to watch. But man, we've just had amazing upsets, teams doing well beyond their expectations, a very even world of college football. That's one thing I've noticed. There hasn't been like one team completely dominating outside of Oregon. No team has really been safe from taking an L, but it has been such a fun season. We're here for conference championship weekend. We already have had one game with implications on the college football playoffs, which I'll talk about in just a second. But I wanted to make one final video kind of recapping the season, talking a little bit about the conference championship games, and I'm going to give my final predictions on what the 12-team college football playoffs is going to look like. All right, before we get into it, just make sure to like, subscribe, comment. If you don't subscribe, you have to buy me a new Xbox for Christmas or something cool like that. So it'd be much easier to just go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button. So why don't you just do that? That'd be pretty cool. We got a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to keep y'all waiting. Let's go ahead and jump into conference championship weekend. So like I said, we already have had one game with a little bit of college football playoff implications. We had Boise State beating UNLV 21-7. This was kind of expected. This is the team that was a non-Power 4 team that we kind of expected to be in the playoffs. I think the one thing riding on this weekend is where Boise State will be placed. I think they're going to be a top 4 team, personally. We'll get to that in just a second. But the way things are shaping out, I think they're either going to be that 3 or that 4 seed, which is crazy to think about. But congrats to Boise State this year. They've played pretty good all year. They have one loss on the record, and that loss is to Oregon. So kudos to them. They won when they needed to. Ashton Jeanty having an amazing season. To me, he's the Heisman Trophy winner. It's either him or Travis Hunter. Jeanty has just put up insane numbers all season. So that's who I would give the Heisman to. I don't know. I might make a separate video about the Heisman Trophy. But yeah, congrats to Boise State. Let's talk about the earliest game we have tomorrow. We have the Big 12 championship game between Iowa State and Arizona State. Now, this is a tricky one. Like, I haven't watched a lot of either team, but it'll be fascinating to see the two dynamics of these teams. Like, I personally, I'm going to go ahead and spoil it a little bit. I think there's a chance that one of these teams is not a top 4 team, depending on what happens in the ACC championship game, which I'm about to talk about later. I'll give the slight edge to Arizona State. They have a little bit of a better resume, in my opinion. So I think they're going to be the team that gets it done tomorrow. But again, it's really a flip of a coin to see who wins this. And I think there's a high chance that one of these teams gets stuck at the 12 spot position. So we'll see. But for now, I'm going to take Arizona State. Let's talk about a really exciting matchup, a rematch between Georgia and Texas. Now, Texas, to me, outside of their one loss to Georgia, has looked like the best team in college football. I'm just going to say it. They've played consistently very good. I know Oregon is undefeated, but to me, Texas, I don't know. They've looked like a better team outside of the Georgia loss. And I think that they're going to remedy that loss here. Give me Texas in a 1-2 touchdown kind of game. I think Georgia will stay in the playoffs despite being a 3-loss team. I think they might even stay as a hosting team, maybe. I don't even know if they'll drop out the top 8 because Texas is a good team. And the reason I say that is because Georgia's losses this year are not bad losses at all. They lost to Ole Miss, they've lost to Alabama, and let's say they lose to Texas. That's 3 not bad losses at all. For an SEC team, even though it's 3 losses, you still made it to your conference championship game. You're still going to be in the playoffs, in my opinion, even if they do drop out of that top 8. And even if they do drop out the top 8, I don't think it'll be that far. I think it'll be a 9-10 kind of spot. Yeah, this will be a great game, but I think Texas is going to want to get their get back on Georgia. Georgia played their best game all year against Texas, in my opinion. They're coming off of a sluggish win against Georgia Tech. I think Texas is going to be all guns blazing, and I'm going to take Texas by, I'm going to go with 14 points, a 2-touchdown game. Let's talk about another really exciting matchup, Penn State-Oregon. I think this is going to be a much closer game than people expect. Penn State has been one of the most surprising teams this year. I think when people thought Big 12, or not the Big 12, the Big 10, I think they thought Oregon, Ohio State going into the season. I think they thought Michigan. I don't think a lot of people expected Penn State to be in a spot that they were in, but they've had a very, very good season. Definitely well deserving of a playoff spot, regardless win or lose right here. And yeah, I kind of spoiled it a little bit. I think Oregon's going to take this by 2 to 3 touchdowns. I think it'll be a fun game to watch, but I think eventually Oregon pulls this game away. Dylan Gabriel playing phenomenal all season long. Georgia is the team to beat in college football, and I don't think that Penn State's going to get it done, but they definitely stay in the playoffs, and they definitely stay as a first-round host, in my opinion. Who they get in the first round will be very interesting, though, in my opinion. All right, final game of Conference Championship Week. This is going to be razor thin, a game that has huge implications on the playoffs. I think if you have one team that wins, we're pretty set in stone. Another team wins, I think we're going to have a big discussion. The committee's going to have to make a really difficult choice. I'm talking Clemson. I'm talking MSU. Who gets this done? Now, SMU has only one loss on their record, but I'm about to pull up their resume. It is not that good, guys. I think their best win all year is probably Pitt. And even that is not super impressive. They're in the ACC, which is already a super weak conference in my opinion, and they didn't even play the Miamis of the world. I don't even think they played Georgia Tech. They're just now playing Clemson. They didn't play Syracuse, who's just turning out to be, I think, maybe a 3-loss team. So yeah, even the top teams in the ACC, they did not beat. On the other hand, you look at Clemson, they're already 3 losses, but I think their resume is much better. They have a loss to Georgia, which Georgia's a very good team, which is understandable. A loss to South Carolina, a very competitive loss to South Carolina. South Carolina's turned out to be a much better team than expected. They beat Pitt, which was arguably SMU's best win on their schedule. Clemson beat them as well. And then they lost to Louisville, which is a pretty bad loss. But I think that Clemson has had a tougher schedule. They've had to go through more adversity, and I think that's going to fare them pretty well in this game. And as an Alabama fan, trust me, I am pulling for SMU. I think if SMU wins this, Alabama's in, regardless. And I think if Clemson wins, the committee is going to have a long, drawn-out conversation about SMU as a 2-loss team who got to their conference championship, as opposed to Alabama, a 3-9 team, didn't get to their conference championship, but has a much better resume. And I could take the easy way out right here and say SMU wins this, but that's just not what I think is going to happen. I think the Clemson Tigers win the ACC championship and punch their ticket to the college football playoffs. And let's see, that leaves a huge discussion, which I'm about to go through. But I'm going to go through my predictions for the college football playoffs first in terms of order. We're going to go 1 to 12. All right, I have number 1, the Oregon Ducks. This is pretty easy, set in stone. They're undefeated. I think they're going to win the Big Ten championship, which to me is the second biggest and strongest conference in the country. You could even argue it's the best. Give me Oregon at number 1. Pretty easy to figure out. Texas is number 2 for me. That's another easy one. I would have had Texas at number 1 over Oregon if they were undefeated. But I don't want to penalize Oregon for being undefeated. But Texas, I think, is going to be that easy number 2 spot. Number 3, and this is where I think the college football playoff needs to be a little bit adjusted. I like the 12 teams, but I hate the automatic 1 through 4 spots because it leaves room for stuff like this. I'm going Boise State at 3. I don't think that you can put anyone over Boise State, personally, in terms of either Arizona State or Clemson. But that sucks to me because I think if you look down this list, I think Notre Dame deserves to be in that number 3 spot. But with how the rules are for this season, I really think this needs to be changed. But I'm going Boise State at number 3. Whoever wins that 6 versus 11 matchup, I think they're going to have a pretty comfortable game against Boise State. So I think that needs to be looked at as a change. But give me Boise State at number 3. Likewise to how I feel about Boise State, I got Arizona State at number 4. Again, whoever wins the 5 versus 12 game, which I have an idea of who that's going to be, they have a pretty easy path to the semifinals. So I just don't like the way that's structured. But again, playing by the rule set of how they have it this year, give me Arizona State at number 4. And I'm going to go ahead and put Clemson in that number 12 spot. Y'all already know they're the last of the 5 conference champions remaining. I don't think they're going to jump anybody on the 1 through 12 or the 5 through 12 spot. So go ahead and give me Clemson at number 12. Let's talk about 5 through 11. So 5 through 11 are teams that didn't win their conference championship. They earned their spot another way through resume, record, whatever the committee thinks. I got Notre Dame at number 5. I think they're going to be the best team that didn't compete for a conference championship. And if you put Notre Dame in the ACC, I think they dominate the ACC. I think Clemson's gone. I think SMU's gone. And we're looking at a number 2 or 3 Notre Dame. But because they are an independent, they didn't play for a conference championship. But to me, they're easily probably the best non-conference champion team in terms of resume, how they've played this year. They have some really good wins. Their only loss was to Northern Illinois, which is a terrible loss, but it was early in the season. They only lost by 2. Hate to hold that against them too much. I'm going to go number 5, Notre Dame. Number 6, I'm going to go with Penn State. I don't think they dropped too much from that number 3 spot of where they are currently. A loss to Oregon, to me, isn't the end-all, be-all. Penn State has played great all year, and especially if they keep this game close with Oregon, a 2-loss team that was in their conference championship, especially the Big Ten, that's a pretty good team in my opinion. And there's some teams I could argue would jump them, but yeah, I'm going to go with Penn State for right here. Right behind them at number 7, I'm going to go with Ohio State. Now, normally I would have Ohio State over Penn State, but this is kind of my reasoning for that. The 2 losses from Penn State are to Ohio State and hypothetically to Oregon. Those are 2 phenomenal losses. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, you got to look at head-to-head matchups. And I think you do. That was an early game in the season. Ohio State only won by a touchdown. And to me, the Michigan loss just looks terrible. It bumped them out of the Big Ten championship game. And I think the committee is going to look at that game against Michigan and then look at Penn State being in their championship game, maybe keeping it close with Oregon. And I think they're going to go with Penn State just barely. But I could so easily see that being flipped, putting Penn State at 7, Ohio State at 6. But I'm going to go with my gut and stick with Ohio State at 7. If they had not lost to Michigan, this would be a different story. But I'm going to go with Ohio State at 7. And the last team that I have as a first-round host, I'm going to go with SEC's Tennessee Volunteers, a 2-loss team. They've looked really good all year. They have a pretty bad loss to Arkansas on the record, but their other loss was to Georgia, and then you can flip that. They have some really good wins against the likes of Alabama. They beat Vanderbilt, which is a team that beat Alabama. They beat NC State early on in the year. They beat an Oklahoma team that Alabama lost to. So Tennessee, some really good wins on their record. I think you pick them over a 3-loss Georgia team, even though Georgia getting to the SEC championship is great. But I'm going to go with Tennessee right here at the 8th spot, and I think that Neyland Stadium will get a first-round game, which is going to be crazy. I think that stadium is going to go nuts. At the number 9 spot, I'm going to go with the Indiana Hoosiers. They have been a shock team this year. I mean, who would have expected Indiana to be as good as they are this year? But they've done it. They have 1 loss on their record all year, and it's to Ohio State. And it was a pretty, I think 38-15, they lost to Ohio State. And Georgia having 3 losses, Indiana only having 1, and being in such a strong conference like the Big Ten. To me, you cannot penalize them for that. I'm going to go with Indiana here at number 9, which sets the very first game that we have in my predictions, which is Tennessee hosting Indiana. I think that'd be a fun game. I'll make a separate video on predictions for throughout the playoffs. I'm not going to sit here and predict a game that I'm predicting because why? That's just too much. I don't want to sit here and predict a game that is not even set in stone, but that would be a fun game. I would pick Tennessee though. Number 10, I kind of spoiled it. I got Georgia, which would put in my bracket Ohio State hosting Georgia. Man, that would be a fun game. I would love to see that. I think that's very realistic too. Ohio State hosting them or maybe Penn State hosting them. Yeah, that would be such a fun game to watch. Georgia, a 3-loss team, but all 3 of their losses are not terrible. They have a loss to Bama, a loss to Ole Miss, and a loss to Texas. None of those are too bad of a loss to bump them out the playoffs, in my opinion. They stay in the 10 spot. They're going to have to go on the road and play a tough game, but I am going to go with Georgia at the number 10 spot. And if they win this Saturday, man, there's a chance because they've already beaten Texas. To me, they get up to that number 2 spot, which would be a huge difference, and that's how big of the stakes Georgia are playing for, whether they get a first-round bye or they have to go on the road for a tough matchup. So we'll see, but I got Georgia at number 10 for now. All right. This is interesting to predict. I am an Alabama football fan. I'm just going to say it straight up. But to make this decision, I've tried to remove myself from that bias because I don't want my bias to get in the way of what I really think is the right call here. Alabama or SMU. I think that it comes down to these two teams. The committee said that anyone not playing on Saturday, there's not going to be any movement between those teams. So Miami out, South Carolina out, Ole Miss out. Alabama versus SMU. Who gets in terms of this? I don't know. I'm very conflicted because on one hand, you have an SMU team that would be 2 losses who are in the ACC championship game. But, I don't know, normally I would say Alabama so deserves this, even at 3 losses. But 2 of these losses on Alabama's record are just bad. There's no other way to say it. They're bad losses, especially the Oklahoma loss. Vanderbilt has actually done decent this year. I know they have the same record as Oklahoma, both 6-6, barely bowl eligible, but Vandy has not looked bad this year. And being at Vanderbilt only winning by like 4 or 5 points or something like that, that isn't like the worst thing ever. It's bad, but the worst thing ever to me is the loss at Oklahoma. Didn't score a touchdown, got steamrolled. That was embarrassing. It's hard to look past that. But I will say, if you put Alabama with SMU's record, to me, it's hard to see them not going undefeated with that schedule. Maybe 1 loss at the worst. And then you put them against Clemson this weekend. I think Bama whoops up on Clemson. Another thing I don't think a lot of people are giving Bama credit for is how hard it is to play in the SEC. You don't get a break. You don't get a break against any team. Like they've shown us. I mean, Oklahoma beat them. Vanderbilt beat them. But another thing I will say is Bama's strength of schedule is really good to me. I know a lot of people are talking about the Georgia win, and that Georgia win is phenomenal, but that's not the only thing on their record. Like, I'm pulling their record up right now. They beat a Missouri team. It's like spanked a Missouri team that's like in the top 20 right now. Went on the road to Death Valley to beat LSU, and I know LSU didn't turn out to be the best team. That's still a pretty good win, though. They won the Iron Bowl. That's never an easy game to win. The South Carolina win looks really good now, considering South Carolina's in the top 15. A lot of people thought that was a bad showing from Alabama, and it turned out South Carolina was just the real deal. And then you have barely a loss to Tennessee, which is easily their best-looking loss on their record. So, all that to be said, and I'm trying not to be biased right here, but to me, Alabama deserves this spot over SMU. Do they deserve a spot in the playoffs necessarily? Not with the way they've played, but over SMU, I think they deserve it more than SMU. And I think, as weird as it is to say, I think they're a top 12 team this year. I still think that, even with the losses, just because they have shown glimpses of being the best team in college football. They showed it in the first half against Georgia. That was probably the best half any college football playoff team has played all year. They showed it in the Missouri game, spanking a team that was still fighting for a playoff spot. Going to Death Valley and doing what they did. They've shown glimpses of being not just a great team, a phenomenal team. And to me, Alabama has done enough to get that spot over a 2-loss SMU team that's in the ACC, which is already a weak conference, and didn't even play the best competition in the ACC. So give me Alabama at number 11, who would go on to play Penn State. And that's a tough game for Alabama. You know Penn State's bringing that wide out. But I think Alabama gets in. This could all be avoided by SMU winning. If SMU wins, Alabama's the 11th seed, regardless. But all that to be said, give me Alabama at the 11th seed. I said Clemson as the 12th seed. And that's who I've got. Number 1, Oregon. Number 2, Texas. Number 3, Boise State. Number 4, Arizona State. Number 5, Notre Dame. Number 6, Penn State. Number 7, Ohio State. Number 8, Tennessee. Number 9, Indiana. Number 10, Georgia. Number 11, Alabama. Number 12, Clemson. That's how I see it. But I guess we'll all have to watch, see how it shakes out. I could be very wrong. I look back on my predictions from the beginning of the season for my playoffs. I had Alabama going undefeated in the regular season and losing to Georgia in the SEC championship. So my predictions could be super wrong, but that's just how I feel about it. Like and subscribe. Let's watch these fun games tomorrow. Let's see how it shakes out. And I'll come back and maybe make a video talking about did the committee get it right kind of thing. But until then, enjoy your weekend. Roll Tide. We'll come back on the next video and we'll talk about it.